Grief is such an overpowering emotion, especially after losing someone so close to you. It can take months, years, even decades to get back to normal, if that's even possible after experiencing a significant loss. This podcast was created to help you move through and release the emotions, allowing you to heal the hurt and begin living again. Listen in as I chat with medical professionals, grief workers, and people who have first-hand experience in losing a loved one, what their experience has been, and what they did to help heal themselves and those around them. Life isn't always sunshine and rainbows, but I believe there is always a silver lining if you're willing to look. Welcome to the Release Podcast. Good day. I almost said good evening, but it's not even evening where I'm at and recording this. So happy day. Let's put it that way. Welcome to Release Grief Podcast. Another episode today. I'm with Miss Sarah Brewer, and we have a lot. There's some heavy topics coming on today from her intake sheet. So thank you, Sarah, for joining me on this podcast. I'm super excited to chat with you, and welcome.
Thanks for having me, Faith. It is gonna be a good one. I feel like let's get deep.
Let's get deep. It's all about grief. So how do you make it sexy and fun, right? You don't. You just talk about it.
Let's go
So
for it.
that's what we're going to do today. I met Sarah a couple weeks ago at a in-person event I was at doing public speaking, and her story resonated with me when she was talking about it and how she was um, the way that the words that she was using and the way that it was making me feel, I completely resonated with her story. So I really want to get into it. So Sarah, walk me through some of the things.
Oh my goodness, just
Yeah.
go through the things.
You're like, oh shoot, we're here right now. Like, boom.
There
What
is no.
what made you want to come on the podcast? What made you
Hmm,
say yes to me asking you to be on this podcast?
that's a great start. Um, I just feel for me, it's been, I wouldn't say it's practice, but it's really helped me to express more of my story just because you're not the only one that my story resonated with a couple weeks ago. A couple of people that I didn't even know came and share with me some really, amazing, vulnerable things. And I hope that, just being able to keep being vulnerable and get opportunities like this to share what I have can hopefully keep reaching people who might need to hear, a word of hope or a word of encouragement. And yeah, so sometimes I feel like it's just as for others as it is for me.
Yeah, it was I'm really happy that people are reaching out to you because I think that people need a support system. And we'll get to what her story was all about here in a little bit, and what her message was. But I think in grief, most people need a support system, but grief is such a broad term.
Hmm.
And you have grief in everyday life. You have grief from losing jobs, grief from, the wind blowing the wrong way and you can't get out and garden, oh, that's my grief. A lot of it. But when you have a deeper grief, like losing a child, like losing a loved one, losing a family member, those types of grief, they hit a little deeper, they hit a little harder. And so it's nice to be able to connect with others that maybe have been on the same journey, not same
Hmm.
circumstances, but the same journey.
Hmm.
And to be able to lean into them and be like, hey, how did you make it through X, Y, and Z? How did you handle like this type of people or this type of comment or being shunned or whatever it is that's happened? Hold on, I've got my computer is starting to pop things up on my screen. Not ideal.
Uh-oh. You're like,
So,
okay, good job.
yeah, it's like, no, go away. I don't need that right now. Um, so go ahead, talk to me about what you said on stage, at that meeting like a couple weeks ago, because I think there's more people than not going through it,
Mm.
that are hiding it or that have not spoken about it.
Yeah, so my message is called Transforming Trauma into Truth. And in that message, I went over some symptoms of what, burying trauma was doing to my mind, brain, and body. I kind of mentioned in there that I found the book The Body Keeps a Score, and I was able to educate myself on how not really facing trauma can come up as like illness that I was having a while back and all this stuff. And it was because I went through and had an abortion in 2022, and I thought that kind of punishing myself mentally, physically, emotionally was the answer to get myself through that. And at that time, I didn't have a support system because I've never really been someone to share like the hard things that I'm going through, just because in my family system, we never really talked about emotions or the hard things. I kind of was like, oh, like, get over it and like, let's keep moving on. It's not something we need to dwell on. And so that's a mentality I've had all my life and didn't think anything of it. And so when I was kept bearing that trauma, because one, I've never been through something like that, and I was pretty, guilty and felt shameful for what I had done. And so I didn't feel that I was comfortable enough to share with anybody either, just because, just in the world right now, that topic is pretty um I don't know, it's a tough one to kind of talk about comfortably. And yeah, and so I just thought, through my experience and all the things I was doing to myself, I thought, man, like I could have kept doing this. I could have kept getting sick. I could have kept having this mentality that I need to punish myself for what I've done instead of go the opposite way of just forgiving and loving. And yeah, and that's kind of how my story shifts, is being like, here's what I was doing that I thought was healthy, and here's what I ended up finding was the right answer to helping myself heal and grieve and do all the processes that were, in a much more healthy way than what I was actually doing.
Oh, I love that because I agree with that. I shared your story about abortion and going through that process with a friend of mine, and she because she had opened up to me before about having one,
Mm,
and she goes, "People don't expect you to be able to or think that you should be grieving this child that you aborted." She goes, "Because you chose abortion." And
right.
I'm like, in my mind, I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, well, that's just kind of shitty. Like, you should be able to grieve everything. And I don't know the
Mm,
circumstances of the abortion or why she chose to abort the baby or anything like that. Um, and that's not my story to tell either. So I'm not gonna like go on and on about that one. But it's different. Everybody has a different reason for choosing that option in life. And regardless of whether you're doing it selfishly or not selfishly, you're still allowed to grieve the choice that you make. Um, and I find that it's absolutely beautiful that you're talking about it because you're right. In society today, it's a shunned topic, which most grief is, but especially abortion or,
mm,
having a baby or giving it up for adoption. Those are all three variables that
absolutely.
that get a lot of flack.
Mm-hmm.
So how long had so you had an abortion in 2021, you said?
22.
2022. 22. So when did you actually start opening up and talking about it or realizing like this was a negative path and it was causing more harm than good to keep it all, the emotions and stuff all bottled up inside? Like how
Mm,
long did it take you to be like, you know what? Fuck this. I need to talk about
mm. Well, so September, it happened, and then October is when I started getting into bodybuilding, which I mentioned in my speech. And
it. Hmm.
so I did that for a few months, and I was like very strict on the diet, and I was working out lots of cardio 7 times a week, and I didn't notice any changes. And even my coach was like, "Okay, like, are you sure you're eating the things you're supposed to?" And I'm like, "No, like, I'm eating the protein cream of wheat, like I'm eating the disgusting stuff. Like, promise me, I promise you, like I'm doing everything." And I just couldn't lose weight, and I just was bloated, and felt very, very inflamed. And so then I just stopped doing that because I was like, okay, something's wrong. And I didn't want to go to the doctor because I had a feeling that they weren't necessarily going to find the root symptom. So I went
Hmm.
to a functional medicine doctor and helped me in that way. But this was still, I was working on the physical aspect, and I didn't actually tell someone until a year later.
Oh,
And
wow.
I had been going to church. I've been going to church all my life. And when I was trying to go, fix my body and do this route, like I didn't go to church for that whole year. Like I was going through the grieving process. Like I was angry. I was, going through the shameful part, the sadness. Like I was going through all the emotions. And so it just took me away from, kind of what I believed in for a long time. And so when I went back to church, it's ironic. Sometimes I go and the message just like, oh, it's talking to me. And I knew this lady that I had been in a small group a while back. I just decided, you know what, like she's indifferent, like, she's much older. If anything, she could be like a grandma figure to me in telling her what I'm going through. And then when I told her, I like had her at the house, and it was everything was built up, like all the anger that I felt throughout that year, the sadness, the guilt, everything that I mentioned already. And once I told her, I found out that she had gotten an abortion too, like when she was much younger. And so I felt that it was definitely the right person to tell, but it was hard because I was going through things and like my friends could tell I was different. I was in business, but I wasn't making any money because I wasn't very motivated to do anything because I just like was just foggy and I just had no attention to like show up for people, especially being a photographer. I just didn't have the energy. And so, yeah, it took me that whole year just to find anybody to talk to. And I didn't notice like changes like in my body right now until a year and a half because,
Oh,
I had
wow.
to finally get off my chest. And then finally my body is like, okay, now that you've told someone, how are you going to heal through this process, on the emotional and the side of that kind of stuff? Because I was doing the physical, healing my body in a
Yeah.
natural way, but I wasn't getting the other two areas that needed it too.
Yeah, it's interesting, like when you bottle the stuff up, how much of a impact and toll it does take on the body, even though you're eating healthy, even though you're going through all the other things, but just keeping that emotional baggage inside as opposed to just like letting it out.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I love that, that you were able to finally find someone to be able to be comfortable enough to talk to.
Mm-hmm. Same.
Um, yeah, because
It felt so
imagine,
good.
yeah. Do you still have a good connection with her?
Yes. Yeah, she still checks in on me and
Oh.
so cute. Her name's Debbie and she's just like this little pickleball player. And I'm just like, Debbie, I love you. Like if I need to talk to anybody about anything, I'm just gonna call you up. She's like the fun grandma who's just like, oh girl, here's what I did. Like, let's play pickleball and forget all the, it's cute.
She sounds amazing. Like I might need her number.
Yes, everybody needs to know Debbie.
So you're on the speaking tour, or speaking tour. Doing
Not
public
yet.
speaking.
I like
I
the sound
know.
of
I'm
that
like,
though.
let me just like, oh, maybe it is coming true though. She's on a speaking tour. So if anyone needs a speaker,
Mhm.
just
And you want someone to talk about trauma and you like that, that's a
yeah.
kicker. Don't want it to be something fun and lead up to it. And I'm like, hey, I'm gonna talk about trauma.
Right. I'm going to talk about the hard things because the hard things need to be talked about. Um, so if you don't mind me asking, were you in a relationship with the father for this baby? And give me a little bit of backstory on what led up to
Mm.
this moment.
Um, well, I had a friend visiting in town. She's my best friend, and we only see each other once a year because she's lived abroad over the last few years. And so she was in town and had all my friends together, and we went out and had one of those nights where you drank a little too much and just met this guy at a bar and had basically a one night stand. And it's interesting because in my experience of drinking, I unfortunately get to a point where I don't know how to stop very well because I've used alcohol for many, many years trying to cope because I've
Mhm.
been also sexually assaulted. And
Oh
at that
no.
time, through well, both of those times, I still didn't have anybody to share. That's also stuff that I kept with me for a very long time, just internalized. And so
Right.
alcohol was, the outlet for me for a very long time. And so it's it was interesting. There was a theme that night that, oh, my thought process had always been, if I'm drinking, I meet this guy, like that means I'm like attractive, and that means that, we go through the motions, and I never was really good at saying no, or leaning on my intuition. I was like, are you sure you want to sleep with this guy? And so that night ultimately led, to me getting pregnant, and it's kind of a whole thing because like he didn't let me know, first of all, or else obviously, you take actions to
Right.
hopefully avoid it. um, and yeah, I found it literally the week I was supposed to go on a San Diego trip with a friend, and this is where Idaho had just banned abortions. And so I just found out a couple days within going to San Diego, and so I scheduled an appointment and got in while I was on my trip and able to get the treatment and everything. And so it was a very interesting way. Like, I don't want to say it's a coincidence, but the way that everything lined up, I was able to do that was stressful, one, and two,
Yeah.
just kind of like it had to all happen all at once. So like once I found out, it was like a couple days later, that's when I had to go do it. And I was only 5 weeks pregnant, so it's very very early. But still, it's a very painful process, and it whoever has to go through it, like I feel it, like you feel the loss literally. It's pretty crazy.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a lot. So traumatized early on, so like your coping skills with the alcohol, and trying to cope through those things without seeking the support or having support, um, I think is key. Man, man, like that is, but you stop and you think about how many other people have been through the same thing that aren't saying anything.
Hmm.
And keeping those emotions because, like you said, the shame as well, because you felt shame after doing that because of, all of these lead up things that are happening to it. And I just feel kudos to you for actually stepping up and taking the shame away, removing that darkness, that piece that keeps you
Hmm.
hidden under, because that's the part that keeps you pressed down, and that's the part that keeps you from, being healthier if you choose to be healthier, and whatever your endeavors are, to be
Absolutely.
able to go further. Because
Hmm.
I do love that book, The Body Keeps the Score, and it's so true. Um, but it's not talked about in society either. Like, we keep pushing everything down that is of, I don't want to say everything, but a lot of things that are of substance and value of keeping it down because they just want to focus on, the Instagram life, the perfect little piece together thing where nothing ever goes wrong. And I just had a thought of the Barbie movie. I watched it and I was so not liking it. I'll put it that way. And felt like I had wasted a couple hours of my life because
Oh,
the
darn
movie
it.
was just, it was just, a bit for me. And so it just felt like everything was just custom, curated every day, same thing over and over. And
Mm,
there was no room for emotional expression. There was no room for
mm,
self-reflection, and there was no room for internal growth at
mm.
all.
So important.
And I love that you're actually taking the steps to be able to do like the whole internal work.
Oh yeah.
So, how long had it been between the time that you had the abortion? So, did any of your friends know when you went to San Diego?
Just a friend that I went with,
Okay.
but it's that's just something that I had to like let her know in advance, like, hey, I'm gonna be, at the
Oh,
doctor's while I'm there.
sure.
And then when I found out what had happened, it's just I mentioned in my speech that she literally stopped being my friend right afterwards. Like as soon as we got back, like I didn't hear from her, didn't say anything else. So that was like another thing to add, like, oh well, someone's gonna react in this way, like, I'm a bad person because that's why she probably stopped talking to me, is because, I did something bad. And so that was definitely another way to add on, like, okay, well, I'm not gonna tell anybody else now because I don't want to lose friends or lose
Right.
anybody just because of what I've done.
The stigma.
Yeah, it was hard.
So you're still not friends.
Mm-mm.
Oh, that's sad. We
Yeah.
had it amazes me how people's their thought processes, and it's probably got nothing to do with you. It's probably got, I know you said you went to church and stuff quite a bit too. I know from my experience, church has always been one of those things that they expect you to toe a certain line.
Mm,
And if you do not, one, don't talk about it.
yeah.
Two, if you do talk about it, don't come back. It's
Mm,
one of those things. And so I don't resonate with churches at all. And and I'm not saying I don't want people to take it that there's nothing good in church, because that's not what I'm saying at all. My
mm-hmm.
experiences are going to be different. And the
100%.
churches that I had went to are going to be different. So if you're going to church and you love it and you find connection there and people are supporting you, please stay going. Like, don't stop going. Um, I just want to put that little caveat out there so that people aren't just like, oh no, we need to stop going to church. I'm like, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm
You're like,
saying.
hold on. Let me finish.
Hold back on the horses. Hold on. Um, but it is interesting that you found a connection at church to be able to support you during all of this. So how long was it from the time that you had went to San Diego to the time that this lady at church had helped you? Her name is Debbie? Miss Debbie? I
Hmm.
love her.
Yeah, so that was a year mark still. So, yeah, that just kind of that same timeline of a year. And then I don't think I really told friends until it was kind of a few times after that because I'd mentioned in my speech too that once I'd opened up, like I've been a pretty open person. Like I try to be at least for other people. I love to be someone that listens and give advice or just be there for people. And when I was making the speech, this guy like came up to me and him and I ended up talking and I told him about the speech that I was making and he ended up sharing with me like the stuff that he had gone through that last few years and like how he had an almost death experience and what that taught him and how he's looked at life much differently and how that trauma impacted him in a different way. Because usually when people almost die, they're like, "Whoa, okay, that was a close one. I'm gonna keep doing the things that I was doing because I didn't die." So,
Clearly I'm
you know,
invincible.
right? So some people look at him like, okay, well, I'm gonna keep doing what I was doing. But he looked at it and he's like, well, I literally restarted my whole life because I had a choice to keep being what I was being or to become something better. And
Yeah.
so him and I really related on that, and I shared with him just like a few weeks later after I told Debbie, and it was really awesome to like know that I could have gotten on such a deep level with a stranger. Like him and I talked for 2 hours. He was like a 28-year-old man that I never even met, and I'm like, it doesn't have to be just between a woman and a girl, an older lady,
Right.
and then where I'm at in my life. It could be with a man, and I've had throughout then just realize as I've opened up about that, the more people talk to me about things, like I almost like a therapist sometimes. Like I don't even prompt anything. People
Right.
just feel led to share. And I've had 40-year-old men tell me about like how they restart their lives at 40 and then they have to grieve that whole process and like what they thought their life was leading to. And then they realize, oh crap, like I'm unhappy and fulfilled with myself. Now I got to restart. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's kind of amazing what happens when you do rip off the band-aid and share with someone, how much like the universe, God, however you like to say it, kind of puts these opportunities to keep, finding connection and sharing points with people who also have like gone through the grief. Because I know that's what your podcast is all about. Like that is a grief, like the
Yeah.
hard things that we go through. Because for me, I had to grieve like who I was. Same with the guy
Mhm.
that shared with me. When he almost died, he had to lose all of what he was and become something new, and that's what I had to do as well. Um, and now I feel like it's been a few years, and I look at life just completely differently. I'm so thankful for.
Yes. Yes, I agree with that. I think about the person that I was before I lost my daughter and my granddaughter,
Mm,
and even the person I was in between the loss of both of them. And there's significant changes into who I am who I was and who I am now, but more importantly, how I thought back then versus how I think now. Because it's vastly different. I mean, when you experience something extremely profound,
Hmm.
it's it's going to change you. It's going to change how you think, how you feel, how you act. If not, if it doesn't change you, then I don't know what. Because
Well, red
everyone I've
flag.
ever
I'm just kidding.
do what?
I said red flag. I'm just
Right?
kidding.
It's probably true, but
Mhm,
yeah, because everyone I've talked to, like the change is massive. And I mean, obviously it doesn't happen overnight. Um,
mm-mm.
but I
No.
think it definitely has a big snowball effect to keep you moving towards like that doesn't resonate with me anymore. I don't, or my
Yep.
boundaries, like very good with my boundaries now because I think in between my daughter and my granddaughter, they're passing, I let my boundaries like broaden because I'm like, oh, grief,
Mm,
it's this big thing, loss. Like you need to accept everyone and everyone needs to be in your life.
yeah.
And you need to have a place for everyone in your life. And
Hmm.
when you do that, your boundaries vanish because you've allowed everyone and everything into your world. And it took me losing my granddaughter just in 2021 to
Mm,
realize that no, I don't have to let people in. I don't have to go do this XYZ event. I don't have to partake of that, all of those things. I can still have boundaries and grieve and love all at the same time.
mm.
It's just on my terms now, not on the
But
expectations of what everyone else believes I should be doing.
hmm yep. I am like one of those people that I do not have that anymore. Like living for others.
No,
I I've done that for too long and never knew about boundaries ever. Never taught by my parents. People pleaser, all the things that people nowadays are like, don't be a people pleaser. And I'm like, yeah, because that where am I in that equation? Like I'm
right.
always showing up for people. I'm always giving my energy to them. And now I realize like what am I giving back to myself? And I never realized how important that is because I was like, oh well, if I think about myself, like that's
You're
selfish. And
selfish.
why would you do that? So I'm curious on what boundaries that you started to learn that you're like, oh, this is a boundary, don't cross it.
So for me, I just had this realization. So, and I don't like my boundaries come like they don't come all at once. Let me just
Mm,
preface that. So, obviously, I don't know what all of them are because I haven't experienced them all yet.
mm,
But this one that I did experience, I realized that so when I was a child, I grew up, we moved all over the place. I went to many, many, many different schools in different states, and I was raised in the South. I was born in the North, but I was raised in the South.
mm,
And so for me, I had this, so I don't have any friends from my childhood years, my high school years. I have none of those. Plus, I also had a child at the age of 17, so I had a child very, very young. And I chose to raise him. And so with that comes this whole other, emotional side of everything, being a young mother. And I also married at 17, so I was a young wife at
mm.
the same time. And
Wow.
um, and so when I divorced his father, my child's father, I had this notion I could literally pack my house up in a night and move with children. I didn't have to stay anywhere. I didn't I mean, that was the hardest thing for me. I didn't have any friends that I was close to. I didn't have any family that I could always just come and see the family. That was not a big deal. In my mind, I romanticized this beautiful, like gypsy lifestyle that I had
Mm,
always had with my family, that I was going to bring that into my child's world. Even though in my mind I had said, no, when my child starts school, I will settle down and I will find a place to stay. And that lasted for a whole 2 years.
mm,
And then I
mm,
moved again. But the point being is I have no one from my childhood, no one from, you know, previous faith, young faith. to bring
Mm,
into my adult world. So therefore, when I met my husband, my current husband, and was accepted into his world, he's been here his entire life. He's lived in the same town he was born in, like
good
beginning
for
to
him.
end, whatever. I'm like, that is so foreign to me.
You're like, what's that?
Right. And so I realized that all of my friends that I have now are by proxy because of my husband.
Mm,
And for me, like that was a realization. I'm like, you are relying upon the friendships of your husband's friends, for friendships and different things like that, which they may or may not be compatible with you. And so for me, that was a hard realization. It's like, oh, go out and make friends, Faith. Like, this is something you have to do. You can't just expect because they're friends of your husband's to be friends of yours.
yeah.
And we think this way. So that was one of the boundaries, like I had to realize, like, oh, maybe we're not compatible. I don't have to do these things. Some of them I do, for the sake of our marriage and, and friendships and in that respect. But like on a personal level, like, I don't have to go out to dinner or I don't have to go do these things, especially if that's not what I like to do.
Hmm.
And so just
Yes.
honoring those and recognize, but I think first recognizing them and then honoring them. And so it was definitely interesting for me when I had that realization. I'm like, oh shit.
Yeah, and friends are hard. I understand like being a mom, and having kids and like you can't be with the friends who well, I mean you can who are single and
Right.
like can go out and do all these things, but they're not necessarily always gonna relate when you're like, oh, but I need to find a babysitter, and they're like, oh well, I guess you can't go
Well, it was
out
your
with us.
choice to have kids. And you hear that. Like,
Dang.
but people say that, and it's like, yeah, it is. It was my choice. But you know what? I also didn't realize how intensely hard it was gonna be.
Yeah, I see my friends right now with kids. I even babysat for the first time on Sunday, and I was like, whew, like you guys are exhausting, and your mom is with you every day. Like that's crazy.
So my
It's
husband and I have
much too much.
five, and they're blended. We have a blended family. And they're all out of the house. The youngest one's 21 years old. So they're all out living their own lives, right? And they're having kids of their own. So now we have grandchildren. And
Oh,
they're dating women that have children and stuff too. So we accept them right into the fold. They're part of the family. And so between all of them, we have nine grandchildren.
ooh,
And
there you
so when they
go.
come over and then they leave and me and my husband look at each other, we're like, whoo,
Exhausting.
I'm like, I can't imagine us raising five children. Like
How do we do
kudos
it?
to younger me because older me, no.
Can't do it.
It's stressful. It's stressful. And then of course you got to deal with the parenting styles and and then you're
Mm,
adding in, your children don't want to raise their children like you raised them and they want to change
oh,
this.
yeah.
And then you've got the other parent coming in and it's like, so now you've got four ideas. And if
Mm,
they're um like the children have or my children aren't their biological father or whatever, then you have the other parents' ideas and grandparents. I'm like, this is exhausting. This is exhausting. I'm like, whew.
yeah, it'd be really hard. I'd be watching them. I'm like, are you sure you don't want to do it this way? Like, I bet you if you did this, it'd solve it. I just feel like that'd be really hard not to parent while watching your kids parent because you're like, oh, honey, like you're seeing the easy, like this is the easy way to take care of like your kid doing this. And
I
I feel
struggle in
like,
that area because if they come to my house, it's my rules.
yeah, that's how I do it.
And
Then
they all know that when they come to Nani's house, because I'm known as Nani, when the kids
cute.
bring the kids here, because they all call me Nani, when they come here, they know it's Nani's rules apply. And Nani will crack you if you're doing something that you're not supposed to. Like,
Heck yeah.
I don't lay hands on them much, but when they're doing something really stupid or they're harming someone else, it's a quick flick to the, what are you doing? Come on. But overall they're pretty good. But I get onto my kids too. Like if I feel like they're being extremely harsh with them or like
Mm.
harsher to one over the other one when they just got, I will call them out right there in front of everyone. And then they go sulking and crying, whatever. I'm like, I don't care. Like You're not going to talk to them like that. Like, so those are also my boundaries that I've put up. I'm like, this is unacceptable for me. You're
No
here.
tolerance.
Yeah.
Hmm.
You're here. This is what I expect. And for the most part, my grandkids know the rules of the house and they abide by the rules of the house. It just kind of goes to the wayside when they're all here together. Then like,
Oh yeah,
oh, well, we're outnumbering them.
that's what I'd be thinking, honestly.
Hmm. So have you talked to so you talked to your parents about and let them know about the abortion and everything? How did they take it?
Well, I actually told them because I thought they were gonna come watch my speech, and so I was like, crap, like I told them to come, and that's the first time I find out about what I've been through. And so I sat with them at dinner, and it was like a week before my speech, and I let them know. And I had to preface it because I have parents, are very religious, and that's why also why I couldn't tell them because they say all the time, like, oh, abortion is murder, and like this or that against the parents, and there's always another choice. And I kept hearing that throughout the year, and I was like, well, like to me, I felt like I didn't have a choice, and I don't think they're ever going to understand that. And they're much, much older, so they're very, it's almost black and white thinking, and they never, and I mentioned in my speech, they never got told how to deal with their repressed emotions and, their parenting that wasn't the best growing up and the things they went through. And so when I told them, I was like, hey, I'm going to tell you guys something, and I'm not looking for your opinion. I'm not looking for advice. I want to tell you what I've gone through, and all I want from you is love because that's what I just need from you as my mom and dad. And I told them, and actually it took a second because everything I'm sure was going through the mind about like, oh my gosh, like my daughter went through this. Like, here's my religious thoughts on this, but like, here's my parental thought on it.
Hmm.
And at the end of it, they just said, wow, Sarah, like that really sucks that you felt you had to go through that alone because we would have been there to help you. And so that's an interesting thing about stuff that you go through is that your mind will tell you that like it already has it figured out. Like your mind's already decided, oh, when you tell someone, they're going to be upset with you, they're going to be disappointed in you, and it's all negative, negative, negative. But in all the times I've shared, it's always been positive and been, why did you think you had to go through this alone? Because we would have been there for you. And so I think that was like the biggest thing I had to learn was through all my things is that I kept everything to myself because my mind already made up what the result was going to be. And it's amazing how our minds will do that. And so I think, if anything, that's the biggest takeaway from all the traumatic things I've been through is that I just need to tell someone when not right away, but at least like when I feel like I can handle it and can, have the energy to share because it does take a lot of energy and a lot of emotion and mental, everything to tell someone about it. So yeah, that's something I did not expect.
Yeah. Well, it makes my heart happy for their reaction because it could
Yeah,
have went substantially the other way.
I know.
And that are you an only child as well?
Technically I am. Yep. I grew up alone, but I do have a lot of half siblings that have, separate parents from my mom and dad, so I'm the only one that have together.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh. Like that. Yeah. It's amazing how our minds tell us that no one's going to love you. No one is going to accept you. No one's going to believe you. No one is going to love you, friend you, honor you, take care of you. Um, and it is literally our mind playing tricks on us.
Mhm.
Literally our mind playing tricks on us because there is people out there that love you, that want to honor you, that want to friend you, that want to um, you know, hear the good, the bad, the ugly, all the things, and still stand by your side through all of it. It's just finding those people might be tougher, might be harder. But
Oh
the only
yeah.
way you're going to find those people is if you share your story.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Otherwise, you're projecting the wrong aura out there and no one knows who you are truly
Mhm.
and what
So
support you
true.
do need.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's amazing at that time the friends and the things that I was doing. Um, and in my speech I'd mentioned that I kept going until like I did networking for a long time. I networked hard the last 3 years of my business. And at that time, I became the president of one group that I was in. So which meant I was like leading the rooms, I was creating the atmosphere, the energy that that group needed to have because we had a big group and we were known for being like, this is the group. Like they perform, they're early risers, they're go-getters. So I had to show up as that when I was actually struggling. So like I'd come to this room and be like, okay, like we're all good. And I'm like killing it and I got a flow and I'm making people laugh and everything looks great. But then I'd go home and be like, I'm so damn depressed and I am like
Yeah.
can't do this anymore. Like I don't have energy to keep showing up. And then I thought, well, I just need to add another responsibility on. And so I became a chapter director of a women's networking group at the same time. So I was having to create my own group, market myself for that. I had to get members, I had to get people to show up, buy tickets, do all this stuff. And I felt like what I really needed to share was like what I was going through because in my women's group, I could host whatever topic I wanted. And so I'd have people come in and be like, we're going to have a meditation night and a mindset, focus because, it's the fourth quarter or the fourth quarter, the last, there's a, what is this, football? It was the
Right.
last quarter. I'm like, let's have like a reset for our mind because how often, as women in business, especially, do we get a chance to just like take a second and make sure where our mindset at the end of the year? And so I kept doing these groups that were not, business related. And so the person running it was like, hey, are you making a social group, with this like stuff that's not business related, or are we hustling? Or are we telling these ladies to make money? And I'm like, yeah, but that's just not what resonates with me. And so I went through that whole year feeling that way. And then I had friends and doing things that just weren't me. And now I feel like I've broken away from that and have shared more of my story with people,
Mhm.
especially, today. I show up differently and people know that I am genuine. And yeah, it's just crazy how like much I was putting on myself that to like hide who I was underneath it all if I just shared and just like embrace what had happened instead. Um, and it's hard to do that. It's hard to embrace the bad things. It really is. But if you look at them as like, for me, I had to look at it as a lesson. For everybody, it doesn't have to be a lesson. It could just be something like, okay, it's a triumph. How do I overcome this triumph? How is this challenge, gonna either break me or make me? And then you just kind of have to like take your mind again and be like, okay, here's the situation. Which way are we gonna handle it? Wow, that was just a tangent. I was on a high
No, I
horse
love
there.
it. It was good. It was so on point. It was absolutely on point. Because there's a movie out there, I think it was called Alice in Wonderland. Um, and it was the one where she had to battle the beast at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And
Jabberwocky?
yes, the Jabberwocky. And she had to tell her, I think it was she had to tell herself 10 truths every morning or something like that.
Mm,
Um, to keep going. And it's like, okay, what are my truths for today? What are my truths, that I believe in today? Like, do I honestly believe that I'm unlovable, that I am ugly, that I am fat, that I am shameful, that I am all these things? Or do I believe that I am love? Do I believe that I am um, a great friend? Do I believe that I deserve all of these things? And tell yourself all of these things. Like, I am unstoppable. I am a force to be reckoned with, that I exude love before my
mm,
body ever enters the building. And when you start telling yourself those, yeah, it's that old saying, fake it till you make it. But
mm,
eventually, one of those things is going to happen. You're going to actually start believing this the more you tell yourself and really start like embracing what you're saying. And the best way to do that is to look in the mirror and tell yourself. So you're directly staring yourself in the eyes. Like, I love myself. The I am statements. I am beautiful. I am capable. I am loved. I am honest, I am trustworthy, all these things.
mm.
And it's very life-changing when you do those things as opposed to like the negative ones because those are easy to come in.
Mm-hmm.
Easy, like if something doesn't happen right, or something doesn't go right, or whatever it is, and all of a sudden it starts this cascading roll of negativity, and you have to, one, know you're in it, know it's
Yep.
happening, and
Mm-hmm.
two, know how to pull yourself out of it, uh,
100%.
and doing those things. So I guess I don't know why I went on that tangent, but apparently it needed to be said.
Well,
And I had
it's,
something come up to me, and I was thinking of something when you were talking about, and I have to say it because it's going to bother me if I don't. When you were talking about you didn't know why you waited so long to like tell your parents and to tell the people and different things like that, to for support and all of those things. And I'm just posing a question here. And it just makes me wonder if the reason you didn't say anything ahead of time was because you had been raised to not feel like you had the support system in place, or that you would not be supported when you said
mm-hmm,
anything.
mm-hmm,
It's not anything that anybody inherently told you. It was just the
mm-hmm.
things that you had gathered along the path.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I've delved really hardcore into self-development since college when I went on my own because I at home was dealing with parentification. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Mm.
So parentification is when you are showing up as a parental role for your parent.
Oh, okay,
So
gotcha.
so when I was growing up, my parents, much older, and dad would come over and be like, mom's making me feel this way, and therefore this makes me this way, and I'm so frustrated, and your mom, your mom, your mom, your mom, and I'd be like, okay, and then he'd be like, but don't tell her I said anything. Like, okay, I won't. And so I'd go over and do my thing, and then mom would be like, oh, your dad frustrates me so much because he's not doing X, Y, Z. He goes, oh, but don't tell your dad. And so I was a middleman for
Yeah.
my parents all my life. And I was the support system for my dad to be the person that listened and to give him marital advice and be like, oh, well, maybe if you just did this. And I always wanted to fix my parents because they couldn't fix themselves.
Are they
And
together or are they divorced? They're
yeah, they're
together. Okay.
together.
I'm like, are they? I don't know.
I mean, growing up, I was like, I think you guys would be much happier if this just wasn't happening.
Right.
But, you know, I don't know what it is that they stuck together. I call it probably settling, in my opinion, but that's just how I look at it because I know I would never settle for the life that they've chosen, but also that
Right.
they never knew what else to do because they were a generation that stayed married. I mean, they did divorce a couple times, but those were, very valid reasons why they did, but they just didn't know how to deal with their own stuff to make sure they showed up really good in their marriage. Because dad didn't deal with his, all his life troubles, neither did my mom. And so it shows up as victimhood or coming up as being the person that doesn't stand up for myself. So I watched all of this growing up and I was like, well, I'm going to repress my emotions because that's what I saw my mom do. Whenever she was upset at any of us, she'd have the silent treatment or she'd go drive off for a couple hours and we wouldn't know where she was at. And my dad would be somebody who never shows emotions. And now I look at him, he's much, much older, and he's just like quiet. And he's like so unfulfilled. And he doesn't know why, but I know. And I'm like, well, it's because you've literally told no one else the deepest parts of you. So here you are at the very end of your life wondering, how did I get so old? How am I here? And I don't want to be living this life anymore.
Where did
And
I go
that's,
wrong? Yeah.
and it's very, very
Wow.
hard to watch.
How old are your parents?
My dad is 74 and my mom is gonna be 69 this year.
Okay, gotcha.
Hmm.
That is so hard. Um,
Yeah.
Man, we have went down a journey today. I have loved every moment of it. So, if there's a woman out there that's going through similar to what you have been through,
Mm.
what piece of advice would you give her?
I would tell her that, well, first I'd hug her, and then I'd tell her that she is, she did it for the right reason that was right for her, and there's nothing wrong in deciding, making that decision. And then I would let her know that it's okay to tell someone that you know loves you and supports you, and that you will become an even more genuine and authentic version of yourself if you do decide to go through this battle and win it. Just let her know that.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being on the podcast with me today. I've thoroughly enjoyed our chat, and I look forward to future chats, hopefully, and future appearances on the podcast. And
Mm-hmm.
if you guys know someone that needs to hear this message today, please, please send them this video. Connect with Sarah. She is on social media and has a loving ear for everyone. So I will see you all in the next episode, and thank you again for listening. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this special episode of Release. All the links plus a few extras are posted in the show notes below. And if you think someone you know could benefit by listening to this episode, please share it with them. And as always, keep going, keep being, keep doing. You are amazing.